Technical difficulties. Ivan, can you hear me?
I can now, yes.
Okay, maybe this is it. What an absolute shocker. I thought we'd have nailed this by now. Oh, goodness me.
The wonders of technology.
Oh, God, that is down to the fine line. Anyway, we are here. How are you?
I'm very well. How are you?
Yeah, really well. Thank you. Really, really well. Thank you so much for joining us. So I think because we're running late, everyone else has jumped on, which is fantastic. So I just wanted to give a brief introduction. So for those of you who don't know me, my name's Emily Wilson. I'm the Managing Director of FutureYou. So FutureYou is a full service talent management business offering executive search services, specialist recruitment, talent advisory, and contract and interim services. We set up the business 6 years ago with the sole purpose, the power to connect without limitation. And what that means is making meaningful introductions to enable people to grow and develop and solve problems. And so this morning is hopefully a great example of that, where I would like to connect everyone to the fabulous Ivan Gavran, who is a leading business coach and leading strategist. And this morning to talk about everything to do with transforming a culture or a mindset from surviving, which we have all been doing for the last couple of years, into a mindset to enable a business to thrive and grow. So Ivan, thank you so much. I don't know whether you want to give more of an introduction than I have into your background before we kick off.
Oh, good. Thank you, Em. Yeah, look, I'm really pleased to be here, and thank you for the opportunity. And I think it's such an important topic because we're all in some form of survival mode, both personally and I think professionally. I will do a bit of an intro. Shall I just jump into it, do you think?
Yeah, that sounds brilliant. Thank you so much.
Okay, excellent. Well, guys, thank you everyone for joining this morning. It's my absolute pleasure to be here with you. We got there in the end. It was right at the final minute, but that's the wonders of technology. And I think the gift of COVID is virtual engagement, and it's just awesome to be able to connect with you in that way. So this morning's topic, as Emily mentioned, is transforming organizations to thrive. Really important topic given the craziness of the world. COVID has just disrupted everything, every business and every industry in different ways. The lockdowns, the supply chain disruptions, the labour shortage, the skills shortage, you name it. The world's been turned on its head. Everyone's been put back on their heels. And I would say every business has moved into some form of survival mode. But pressure creates diamonds. And the interesting thing about this moment is we're starting to see a bit of that. So IG Co, Ivan Gavran and Co, is a team of business and leadership coaches across the country. So we work with small to medium businesses across a range of industries. And when you're working with so many businesses, part of that role, you get to see some common themes that sit in businesses that seem to be moving out of survival mode a little bit quicker and seem to be absorbing uncertainty a little bit better. And I will share a few of those themes today. So I'm just going to share my screen now. Emily, can you see that?
I can. It's still in presentation mode, but that's it. Perfect. Thank you.
Excellent. So to build on Emily's kind introduction, so this is our logo at IG Co. The dollar represents the commercial part of the business. The heart represents the people. So on the commercial side sits the commercial business model, the revenue engine, the growth strategies. On the people side, it's the structure, the way people are organized into a structure, the leadership capability, the culture, the energy, all of that creates. And the message in this logo is it's about balance. The two need to work together in sync. If one runs quicker than the other, that's where the problems occur. If a business grows quicker than its people, we know growing businesses require different skills at different junctures. That creates growing pains. On the other side, you can have the greatest team in the world. If the strategy is not clear, you can become irrelevant very quickly. So it's about balance. That's the way we think about business on both sides, and that's the way we support business. So on the commercial side, we do a lot of strategic planning development, and on the people side, we do a lot of culture and leadership development. But that's enough about me and enough about us. Let's get into it. So people on the call that know me most people on the call that know me will know that I've got a little bit of a strange habit. I'll watch upwards of 20 sporting press conferences every week, high-level sporting coaches from different sports all around the world. And the reason I do that is because there's a lot of parallels between sport and business. On both sides, they involve teams competing to win. And I think within that pursuit of victory, there's really common themes. I think both in sport and business, teams need a clear identity. They need a clear philosophy and a clear strategy of how to win. And above all, they need strong leadership and strong culture. And so I just love listening to the sporting world. I've learnt a lot. And I especially love listening to sporting coaches under a bit of pressure. You can, it's easy to be a good leader after 10 straight victories, but when you listen to a coach under pressure, you get to see who they really are. So this is a guy called Jurgen Klopp. So Jurgen Klopp is the manager of a famous team in England called the Liverpool Football Club. I happen to be a fan of Liverpool, but the main reason I admire Jurgen is for his leadership qualities. And I'm just going to give a quick background to Klopp because it gives context to why he's featuring in this presentation. So Jurgen started his soccer life as a player. He was a pretty average player. He wasn't blessed with those qualities. He played in a second division team in Germany called Mainz. And at the conclusion of his playing career, he became a head coach of that team immediately. So that's actually quite rare to go from a player of a team to a head coach of that team in one step. So he went from player of Mainz to head coach of Mainz immediately. And I think that talks to the respect that the club and the players had for him. So Mainz is a club in the second division of Germany that is not blessed with a lot of resource or money. They're not a rich club, but he did some amazing things there. They were able to win the second division, and they were promoted to the top flight in Germany called the Bundesliga, which was a monumental achievement. It doesn't happen very often for a poor club to crack it into the top flight of Germany. During that time, he had a lot of big money offers from bigger clubs, and he knocked them all back because loyalty, in Jurgen's words, is not a word, it's a non-negotiable, it's a value he lives by. And he wanted to stay loyal to the club and his contract. So at the conclusion of that contract, he joined another team in Germany called Borussia Dortmund. So Dortmund are a mid-table, they were a mid-table club when he joined them. They had more resource and money than where he came from, but they certainly weren't one of the bigger clubs. And he had offers from bigger clubs, but the reason he joined Dortmund was because he felt the club's philosophy was more aligned to his personal values. So Dortmund is not a club that goes and splashes big money on players. They prefer to nurture their youth and nurture their talent, and that really appealed to Klopp. The other thing about Dortmund is that there's a very strong connection between the club and the community. It's a membership-based club with about 150,000 members, and the club is a real pillar. It's really important to that community, and the relationship between the community in that club is quite special. If you ever wanted to see what that looks like, just YouTube a home match, a Borussia Dortmund home match. It's quite a sight to behold. So that connection between club and communities is very important to Jurgen. Klopp's a manager that's famous for including the crowd. He talks about the crowd as if it's an extra member of the squad, as if it's an extra player. And he'll often use press conferences to set clear expectations on what he expects from the crowd. And he'll often use press conferences to hold the crowd accountable if they're not doing what he expected. So that connection between Klopp and the crowd it's very unique. It's not like anything I've ever seen before. And it really is quite special when you see him walk onto the field after a match. It's like a conductor and an orchestra. So he ended up having great success with Dortmund as well. He took the team from a mid-table team to winning the German title a couple of times. And then he went to Liverpool over in England, another club steeped in tradition and history and a really strong connection to the community. It's a real working class club, Liverpool, and they've underachieved for decades. And he came in and he did some amazing things. He won the Champions League for the non-soccer folk. That's the bee's knees. That's where the best teams from around the world play for this title. And he also won the English title, the Premier League, the first time Liverpool had managed to do that in 30 years. So he's been extremely successful. I shouldn't talk in past tense, he's still going, but he's extremely successful. And his history is to work with community-minded clubs that represent the working class. They're not blessed with money. They're not blessed with a huge budget. They're usually not blessed with abundant resource, but they're blessed with a soul. They're blessed with a history. They're blessed with a story, and they're blessed with a really strong connection to the community. So last season, Liverpool were on a losing streak. They were having a really tough time of it. They just couldn't get a win. And Klopp and his team, it would be fair to say, was under some pretty significant pressure. And as I said earlier, I like to listen to coaches under pressure, because you get to see who they really are. So I pulled out a few slides. I pulled out a few press interviews in preparation for this morning, just to remind myself of some of the things that he was saying when the team were under huge pressure and in that slump. And here's some of the quotes I'll just run through. So we need to be clear on our self-critique. So honesty is a must in Klopp's cultures. It's a non-negotiable. I'm content with the result. You have to deserve it, and we did not deserve it. Something very powerful about accepting a result. Just sitting in genuine acceptance, not blaming anything, just acknowledging and taking responsibility. To play well, there needs to be a rhythm. It needs to feel good, step by step, pass by pass. So philosophies and strategies can traditionally be overwhelming for a lot of players, and it's the coach's responsibility to make the complex simple and to break things down to bite-sized chunks. We must, the next game is the most important game in our life, because it's the only one we play. So Klopp is huge on being present, connecting to the now. Yes, there's analysis on past performances. Yes, there's an eye on the future, where we're going, but he's huge on connecting to the now and only focused on what's in front of him, or mostly focused on what's in front of him. I think there's something quite powerful about that. We must always have hope. We'll go again and again. We're not good enough, but we need to look for the positive. So I think those last few quotes really reveal a core part of Klopp's mindset and personality. He's always looking for hope. He's always looking for optimism, no matter how bad it feels in the moment. And I think the important thing that's not captured on this slide is his energy. And it's hard to capture that in a quote, and yet in some ways energy is the most important thing. Energy speaks louder than words. And his energy all the way through, it was always measured. It was always very objective. It was always very honest. But it always carried this aura of composure. And as we go through this morning's presentation, I'll link these, or some of these quotes, to my points in the business world, because I think there's a practical business application. So a lot of what Klopp talks about is mindset, focusing on the present, looking for hope, looking for the positive. So mindset's one of those things. It always seems to be the first chapter of most leadership and business books, and there's a reason for that, because it's important. It matters. Consciously choosing the lens through which you see things, it has a huge impact on your energy, on the energy of the people around you, and on your personal effectiveness in terms of decision making. And the first question to ask yourself in terms of mindset is, does it set me, or do I set it? And I'm just going to take you through a tool now that shows the difference between the two. So when mindset is setting us, we're showing up in what we call a reactive space. So if I feel like I'm at the effect of the world is happening to me, and all I can do is react as it comes, I'm a victim of what's going on, that there's surefire signs that you've gone into a reactive space. The mindset is set up for reactivity, and the belief is, I have no control, I have no choice. But when we're setting our mindset, when we're being more intentional, we're making a conscious choice of our mindset and how we're seeing things. That's more of what we call a creative space. As problems and changes occur, the belief is, I can be in control of my choice. I can be in control of my response. I can take all this change and all this mess around me, and I can turn it into a creative response and not just be at the mercy of it, not just react. And that's really the difference between reacting and responding. And the powerful thing about this model is when you really see the choice, it need not be driven by external factors. It can be an internal choice. And the other interesting thing about this model is it can be applied at the individual level and at the team level. So you can have reactive people turn up in a creative way at work, because that's the energy of the team, and that's the thing that the team demands. I was talking to a lady, a manager of a back office team in a financial services company recently, and she was just sharing how recently she'd brought in her nephew into the team. And she was a little bit worried about that because of some of his attitudinal and behavioural things. And her team at work was a really strong team, a high-performing team, really accountable. So she was a bit concerned with how that was going to work, but she did it as a favour to her sister and a favour to the family. And she was just sharing how surprised she was by how different he was showing up in a positive way. And she was also sharing how her sister had been observing some different things at home in a positive way. So it's amazing the impact an environment can have on a person. And the reason for that is because energy is catchy. That's the way it works. And that can be either a really good thing if there's an upward spiral and there's a lot of creative energy pulling people up, or it can be a really dangerous thing if the default is reactive and it's pulling people down. So either way, up or down, energy is catchy. So let's explore this concept a little bit more. So reactive, it starts with how you contextualize things. So if there is an event, we interpret it as a problem or a threat first and foremost. So everything that happens is a problem or a threat, even the smallest things. I was in a meeting with a client, and he had a missed call from one of his clients. And within 5 minutes, this thing went from a missed call to, we're losing this client, there's going to be reputational damage, there's going to be financial impacts, and on he went. He was just making up this movie in his head based on a simple missed call. So I stopped my meeting with him because there was no point continuing that. And I just suggested he just return this call and see what it was all about, which he did, and it turned out to be a pocket dial. The missed call was a complete accident. So these are the sorts of things that can happen when we're in a reactive mindset. We're making problems up that aren't there, or we're making problems bigger than what they really are. So when we're faced with a problem, it creates a feeling of angst. And without getting too brain sciencey here, we as humans are not designed to deal with that feeling that well. So we'll usually move away from that feeling through some sort of reaction. And the context of that reaction is not to really solve anything, but it's to move away from the feeling. And that's an important thing to understand. I'm going to say that again. The context for a reaction in a reactive space is not to solve any underlying root cause. It's to move away from a feeling to give us some temporary relief. And for some, that reaction it's always a bit different. For some, that reaction is aggressive because that's their way of just getting it out, at least temporarily. For some, it's to go very passive, play it safe, go under the radar, be safe at least for a period. For some, it's to get really busy. That's mine. I'll roll my sleeves up. I just do. I just move and do and move and do. No idea whether what I'm doing is the right thing or focused in the right areas, but I'll just get busy because that makes me feel good, at least temporarily. And there's 100 others. That's the wonderful thing about humanity. We're all different. We've all got very different reactive expressions. And this is drawn in a circular way. And the reason for that is going back to the earlier point, the context for a reaction in a reactive space is not to solve any underlying any underlying root cause to a problem. It's to move away from a feeling, which often doesn't actually help the problem. In fact, in some ways, the reaction can make the problem worse, hence the circular diagram. I was talking to a CEO, just to give you an example of how this can play out. I was talking to a CEO recently who was engaging or was asking me to come in to fix his team because they weren't stepping up and taking accountability. And so when we peeled a few things back, what became evident is that this business employs his brother, and his brother is underperforming in a very public way. So everyone's seeing it. And the CEO is not doing the accountability thing because it's his brother, and the family dynamics is a bit worried about all that. So he's not doing that. And so this is having a really poisonous effect on the culture because the people are saying, why should I step up and take ownership if the owner's brother isn't? So this CEO has was trying to bring me in. I'll be the fourth coach in less than 2 years. So he's doing everything but solve the root cause because it's just too uncomfortable. So every business has their own version of this, dealing with a symptom and not the cause. And that's what creates this loop, this reactive loop. The cause is never actually dealt with. On the other side, the creative side. So if you've ever felt like you're in flow, things are flowing, that word is often used when people are in that creative space. Athletes talk about the zone. When you're in a zone, that's an indicator of being in what we call a creative space. So anything that the world throws at you, any problem, any challenge, you're able just to roll with it. And when we're in this energetic space, we're locked into some sort of mission, the pursuit of a goal. And that goal could be a small thing, tidying up the garden. It could be a bigger thing, getting out of debt. It could be an even bigger thing, like the impact we're having on society. So we're locked into a goal. The problems are there, but the primary focus is on the goal, not the problems. And it's a goal that we deeply care about, have passion about. And this is the obvious question of the day. Why is that important? Well, you need to care about your problem. You need to care about your goal, because it has to be worth fighting for when the inevitable problems show up. It has to be worth fighting for. So people that are pursuing a goal that's worth enough to them, they'll keep dusting themselves off and keep going. If the goal is not worth enough and the stress of the problem is greater than the value of the goal, then they won't. And it's interesting how COVID and the uncertainty of COVID has really tested this. It's having huge impacts on businesses. It's having huge impacts on industry. It's having huge impacts on people. And some people are really doubling down and doing their best to get their team and their business through whatever's going on. And some are not. Some are tapping out. They're resigning, they're retiring, they're semi-retiring, they're selling their business, they're tapping out. So when the stress of the problem is greater than the mission you're pursuing, people will often tap out. And it's funny how a crisis, or a global pandemic is showing that up. It's funny how that's happening. Life's got a funny way of testing how much we really care about our goals. So creative starts with a goal that we really care about and leads to purposeful action. So every action is intentional and a step towards the goal. That's how it feels. So when you're in a creative mindset, every step is towards a goal. When you're in a reactive mindset, every step is away from a feeling. In the creative space, you're playing to win. In a reactive space, you're playing not to lose. So cultures that have more people making more creative choices more often, it just creates a creative culture. It's logical, right? The majority wins. So to unpack this a little bit and to translate how this practically looks, I'm going to share 4 common characteristics and 4 common behaviours that my team and I have observed in businesses that seem to be moving out of survival mode a little bit quicker. And as we go through these, you'll see none of these points are rocket science, but they can be so easy to forget, especially in times of duress. So here's the first one. The first common characteristic of a creative culture. It's an oldie but a goodie. I cannot believe how often I forget this, and I cannot believe how often it's just generally forgotten. So the outer circle represents what's called the circle of concern. And when you're in the circle of concern, you're putting your energy into the things outside your control. The inner circle represents when you're putting energy into the things that you can influence and you can control. So you're not worried about the issue as much as your response and what you can do about it. And so when you're spending too much energy on risks or issues that we can't do anything about, it flings you straight into that reactive space. And there's so many fruits to getting this energy management balance right. First and foremost, it's just more energizing when you're focusing in on things that you can do something about. It's just far more energizing. The quickest way to get tired is to worry about Vladimir Putin, just something that you can't do anything about. It's really, really draining. The other fruit, the other benefit of getting this right, it just focuses and sharpens the thinking. If 100% of your energy is tuned into something that's actionable, more on your response rather than the issue, you're more likely to respond effectively. Whereas on the other hand, if more of your energy is focused on worrying, then the quality of the thinking isn't there. And that's the difference between a reaction and a response. So I'm starting to build a house. We're literally at the go point. And I was really stuck on as late as recent as Friday of last week. I was really stuck on a few things, a few stumbling blocks. And I just couldn't think my way through it. So my wife and I took a weekend away, literally this weekend that just passed. We took a weekend away to just unplug. And it was just really cool. It was really, really rejuvenating. I came back to the office that Monday morning, the Monday that just passed, and I'm not exaggerating, within about 3 minutes, I'd thought of a way through these stumbling blocks. I didn't have any more information available to me on Monday compared to Friday. But what I did have is a different energy. I was just less foggy. I'd given myself a break from all the things that were creating me worry. So the message in this diagram is where energy goes, focus flows. And it's logical. If you energize your zone of influence, it grows. You get more influence, and vice versa. So top sporting coaches, they'll always bring it back to what they can control. You'll hear that in practically every single interview. The journalists will always try to bait them in talking and thinking about other things around the game, and the coach will always bring it back to what they can control. You'll hear that word, what we can control, 100 times if you listen to 100 interviews. So in Klopp's language, the next game is the most important game in our life because it's the only one we can play. So the most important task or the most important decision you can make is the next one. It's the only one. It's literally the only one you can affect. And that's not to say you don't spend some time in the past to reflect on that and learn from that. It's not to say that you don't think about the future, to think about the risks and setting some goals. But most energy, I would suggest, most energy needs to be myopically connected to the now, to the task and the decision at hand. And people that do that are just more creative. They're more present, they're sharper, they're more energetic. And if you wanted a takeaway from this, a really simple but powerful reflection exercise is to keep track of how much energy is going into worrying about the things that you can't control. It's a very powerful thing to watch yourself. There's something about noticing something in yourself. It just starts to shift automatically. Really powerful reflection exercise. Just monitor how much energy you're putting into things that you can't do anything about. Common characteristic number 2 of creative cultures. So you can map any culture on this continuum. Some are very task-driven. Some cultures are quite task-driven, and the relationships don't count that much. I mean, they're there, but the task is more important, and that has to be achieved no matter what cost. And some relationships are very relationship-driven, to the point where the relationships is prioritized above the task, and difficult conversations are often avoided to protect the other person's feelings. So creative cultures, they get this balance right. They put the relationship and the business outcome on the same footing, on the same level of importance. They lean into the difficult conversations, not afraid of them. They always do it respectfully. There's so many benefits from getting this right, and there's so many risks if the honest chats aren't happening or they're not happening respectfully. And the pathway out of survival mode, I would suggest, has to be underpinned by respectfully honest conversations and a willingness to challenge each other and challenge the status quo. So what's the difference between challenge and aggressive? What's the difference between challenge and an attack? That line can be blurry. And if it is too blurry, that's why people will avoid it. Well, I would suggest the thing that separates challenge and aggressive is intent. If the intent is to help the person and to help the business, you'll feel that. So it won't feel like an attack. It brings a more creative energy. So creative cultures challenge each other more because of their intent. Their intent is to help. It's good for people. That's where growth comes from when you're being challenged. And it's good for businesses. It creates more ideas. It creates more lateral thinking. It gets the better outcomes, and it gets to the truth. It gets to the root cause of what's really going on. You can't get to the truth if you don't challenge each other. So in Klopp's language, we need to be clear on our self-critique. So when you see Jurgen Klopp on the sidelines of a match, he's not backwards in coming forwards and challenging his players. He's not afraid to challenge when he's not happy. But then you'll see him after the game and he'll literally hug his players. He's quite an emotional guy, and you'll often embrace the players, especially the ones that have had a bit of a rough game, a rough time of it. So this isn't a recommendation to start going and hugging everyone, although that might be it. But you've got to find your own way of expressing that, and everyone's got their own way of expressing their assertiveness. Everyone's got their own way of expressing that magic balance and that dance between challenge and support. And the question is, what's your authentic way? And if you're not clear on that, it's worth thinking about that. And the way to get clear on that is reflect on the moments you did feel like you got it right. There will be patterns. What mindset did you bring into the conversation? What energy did you bring in? Where did you focus the conversation? Where did you not focus the conversation? Really powerful reflection exercise. I was talking to a client who did this reflection piece to work out what the common ingredients were when he got the balance right. And what he came to was he was talking to the whiteboard. So when he was challenging teams or people effectively, he was often talking to the whiteboard. So, get up, draw something on the whiteboard to contextualize what was going on, and he talked to the whiteboard. And what he was sharing was what that felt like. The energy that created was that the team, including him, were together on the same side, looking at the problem together, rather than, firing arrows across the table. Again, everyone's got a different way of expressing this assertiveness, this magic dance balance between challenge and support. And it's worth reflecting on what's worked in the past for you, so you can be more intentional next time. Third common characteristic of a creative culture. So we all sit on different parts of this continuum depending on what it is that you're thinking about. So you can be more pessimistic about the world. We've got a war in Europe, COVID, all this stuff going on. You can be more pessimistic about the world, but more optimistic about your own family. You can be more pessimistic about the economy, but you can be more optimistic about your own health and fitness. In my experience, the businesses that are moving out of survival mode and have more of a creative culture, they're looking for things to be more hopeful about more often. They're just more positive about more things more often. There's just more hope, which creates more positive energy, no matter how bad things are getting. There's a really intentional choice to look for reasons to believe. And that's another one that you can chalk up as an obvious thing, but it's really interesting seeing how different cultures are showing up in very different ways on this continuum. And I'm suggesting that there is a common theme in creative cultures. Despite the war, COVID, supply chain disruptions, inflation, skill shortages, the list goes on, they're intentionally looking for opportunities. They're intentionally looking for reasons to believe. And I'm drawing the star on the right-hand side of the middle, not right over on the edge, not right on the edge of optimism. This is not a survey-based piece of research. It's an instinctive assessment. It's just a way to have a conversation with you. The reason I'm drawing the star on the right-hand side of the middle and not all the way over to the right is because I think there's a danger of being overly optimistic. It really bleeds into denial quite quickly and an ignorance of risk. And I don't think I know creative cultures are not in denial and they're not ignoring risks. But what they are is they're acknowledging the risks, they're assessing the risks, they're living in the real world, but they're making a conscious choice to be more positive more often. So in Klopp's language, we must always have hope. So remembering this was taken from his toughest moment of his career in his own words, that down chapter of last season was the toughest moment of his career. And that was his quote: "We must always have hope." That's a strong word, must. We must always have hope, no matter how bad it feels in the moment. We must. It's our duty to always have hope. Good strategy is about doing less better. Bad strategy is trying to solve 100 things at once. It never works. I've certainly never seen it work. So the fourth and final common characteristic of a creative culture is laser-like focus. And there are many famous case studies that prove this. So Apple sacked the late Steve Jobs in the early 90s, I believe. I think it was the early 90s, somewhere around there. Sacked the late Steve Jobs and brought him back a few years later. And people familiar with that story, they'll know that the first thing that the late Steve Jobs did when he returned to Apple in his second stint was to kill 90% of the projects. He just stopped them dead in their tracks, and he created a myopic-like focus on a few areas so that Apple could become the best at a few areas, and the rest is just history. So how do you work out your focus areas? How do you work out your key priorities? It's not as easy as it sounds. And what I would suggest is the quality of the question determines the quality of the answer. Asking yourself what's most important. I always found that a question really difficult, in fact, impossible to answer. Everything's important. That's why it's on the list. So changing the question can have a significant impact in the quality of the reflection process and the quality of the answer. And changing the question to what's most important with the least effort has been a real game changer for me personally. And I know with the clients that I'm working with, has really helped. It's just created a smarter and a more thoughtful reflection process. And I'll give you an example of how this has played out. So I was talking to a business owner who runs a bunch of hospitality venues across the state, and he was just sharing how exhausted he was. And the reason he was so tired, he was just fighting all these battles on so many fronts. He had some venues that had old and tired fit outs that weren't fit for purpose anymore. He had IT issues, which is causing heaps of problems. He didn't feel like his business was purchasing from suppliers effectively, and so on. The list went on. And when we peeled each thing back, cash flow was the thing that sat behind each. So if we had cash, we could do this better. If we had cash, we could do that better. So cash flow was the main thing. So when we peeled cash flow back, what became clear was that it was sales. It was the sales side of the equation, not cost. So he felt the business was managing their expenses pretty well. The expenses were well contained. It was the sales side that was the issue, inconsistent sales. When we peeled that back, there was not enough repeat customers. There was not enough repeat customers in certain venues. And then when we peeled that back, it was due to inconsistent standards. So he got really clear on that. The reason for not enough repeat customers, there was really inconsistent service standards. So he's got a team that employs upwards of 70 people. So we went to this question, how do you solve that with a team of that size? What will have the most impact, the least effort? And he gave that some thought. And he came to, there's three, what he's saying, there's three people in that business. One was himself and two others. There was three people in that business that could have a huge impact in terms of driving a more consistent set of standards with the right tools and the right skills. And so the conversation quickly went from, these 12 big, hairy, complex problems to skilling and tooling three key people up in the business to drive more consistent standards. And that's the art of good strategy, peeling the layers back and creating laser-like focus on two or three things that will have more impact with less effort. So in summary, businesses with a more creative culture are seeming to be moving out of survival mode a bit quicker. And the common themes in terms of what that really looks like, they're better at detaching from the things they can't control. They're having more respectfully challenging and honest conversations. They're consciously being more positive about more things more often, and they're laser-like in their focus. I wanted to finish off with a quick story. So this is a tree, an oak tree in the West Midlands of England in an area called Staffordshire. And you might be asking why it's draped in chains. So the story goes, in the 1500s, an earl had rudely dismissed a beggar. So a beggar came up asking for some money, and the earl sort of rudely dismissed him. And the beggar in response promised a curse. And the curse was that every time a branch from this tree fell, a member of his family would die, a member of the earl's family would die. So that very night, a member of the earl's family died. And as soon as sun broke, the earl raced out to the tree, and lo and behold, a branch had fallen. So in his panic, he got his army of servants to come out to the tree and chain up every branch. And that was 400 or 500 years ago. And a lot of those chains are still there. And over that time, over the passage of time, a lot of the trees around that oak had been destroyed, except the oak, except that the chained oak. It still stands there largely intact and largely preserved. And the reason why is because the iron content in the chains have strengthened the tree. So there's a message in that story. The scars in us and the scars in our business can serve to be our strength. There's something about crises and severe disruption that forces businesses to shake out inefficiencies and to really sharpen up, be it back-end systems and processes, be it the way they're presenting themselves to the market, be it the relevance of their offering. For different reasons, it's harder to make changes and clean house when things are going well. So as the old saying goes, never waste a good crisis. Make a creative choice and look for the gifts in this extreme uncertainty. So I'll pause it there for now. Emily, do we have any questions?
So good, Ivan. Thank you so much. So yeah, if anyone would like to send through some questions via the chat, then please do now. But I've got some for you, Ivan, if that's okay.
Please.
Excellent. Okay, so if you take down the presentation, and then I'll see from this Q&A as they're coming through, or Tanya, if you're on, you can help me as well. so good, and you bring it to life with such relevant stories, so thank you. I think the first thing that really resonated with me is, is mindset setting us, or are we setting the mindset, and not being influenced by all external factors because you can't control them. But clearly in the last 2 years we have had absolute extreme external factors that we've not encountered before. So first lockdown, even myself, is my family going to stay healthy? Are we going to have a business? Fear sets in, and it all becomes very, very overwhelming. And now everyone's been working so hard. How do people actually make the time to understand whether they're in the reactive or creative mindset? Is it all through self-reflection, or is it feedback from other people? Like, how do they actually start where they're at the moment?
I think you've answered it. It's both. Self-reflection is huge. It's a very common personality trait of strong leaders. There's an abundance of research that points to that. Jumping off the treadmill and just stopping, breathing, reflecting, thinking, how did I deal with that situation? What can I learn from that? Just that reflection piece. It doesn't have to be a long, involved process. It could be 3 minutes in the shower, in the car on the way home. Reflection is hugely, hugely important. The more that you notice things in yourself, it just starts to shift automatically. Very powerful. Feedback from others is another really good one, because you can have blind spots. You might think you're being more creative, but the team or the people around you observing something different. And that's what we call a blind spot. So feedback from others is another really good thing to do. Create a safe space, make sure that it feels safe, and you're genuinely open to the feedback, and another really good thing. And it's just practice. It's just practice. We've lost a sporting legend. It's a bit of a sporting theme, so I'll continue on it. We've lost a sporting legend recently in Shane Warne. And we all know Shane Warne. I think most of us know Shane Warne was an absolute superstar on the field, but he had his fair share of troubles off the field during his playing career. And it didn't matter. It just didn't matter what was happening off the field. He could have had front page articles about what he was doing the night before, really negative headlines. But when it mattered, in that moment when he mattered, he was able to just block it all out and compartmentalize. So it's a very common personality trait for high-performing athletes, and I would say strong leaders. They're able to compartmentalize and just focus and attach to the task at hand, and that just takes practice, which comes from reflection.
Yeah. And so if someone is aware that they are stuck in a reactive mindset, is it as simple as saying, okay, I'm going to start the next day being creative, so thinking consciously around every way that I react and trying to be more positive about it? Like, how does, if people have had the reflection, I'm stuck in reactive, how can they shift? Is it just controlling their responses?
It starts with being more mindful. And the more mindful you are, and I mean, this creative reactive is a moment by moment choice. It's not that you sort of wake up and say, today I'm going to be creative. You will literally be tested 10 times a second. It's amazing how that works. It's literally a moment by moment choice. And the way that this works, the more conscious and the more intentional you are, you're more likely to make a creative choice more often. You won't always get it right, because we're humans, but the more mindful and conscious you are, the more likely you are to make a creative choice. And it starts, if you remember the model, it starts with a goal that you care about. So if you're putting everything in the context of a goal that you care about, that's a really helpful start. The other thing that helps me personally is I reflect on patterns. So I'll go back and think about times when I was in reactive, and there are patterns in that. And I'll think about times when I was in creative, and there are patterns in that. And that can be a really useful self-education piece.
Yeah. And I know that we've spoken before about how to put into your day something to enable you to get into the creative space. So, for me, it is getting up super early in my mind, although I'm sure lots of people do, because you can start the day being reflective, being creative, being optimistic, because nothing's gone wrong at that point. The day hasn't actually started, but you're getting your mindset consciously into a really good place of energy where you ideally can encounter problems with a better mindset, where if I just roll out of bed, get into my day, it would be completely setting me on the wrong path.
Yeah, it's important to know your rituals and what works. Everyone's got their own way. Waking up early, meditating, going for a run. My one is running. Running's a really important thing for me. It's my sort of form of meditation and just unplugging. Some people read, go to the gym, swim, whatever that is. But finding a ritual and a rhythm that just helps, it helps on in terms of creating more creative energy. It's important to be clear about. Everyone's got their own way of doing that.
Fantastic. The other thing that really came through for me this morning was the importance of getting the whole team together in businesses at some point, in terms of, relaying the goals and the mission, and seeing where the team really are bought into that, whether it is still important to them, what does need to be changed, so that they are really goal oriented and passionate about the goal. And when you mention energy is catching, well, you've got to be around people to bump into that energy and to take that energy and run with it. You can't just do it if you're working at home, sat behind your laptop. You've got to be around people at some point to create that energy with the team, I imagine.
How good is it when you're part of a team, and hopefully everyone's had an experience of this, how good is it when you're part of a team that are aligned and connected to the same goal in a passionate way? It's just infectious. It's a really cool thing to be a part of, and I really hope that everyone on the call's had that experience. But that's super important. If you're a leader of a team, continuing to check in on that. It's not enough to do the official comms once a year. It's an ongoing dialogue. It's an ongoing conversation to test people's clarity with what we're aiming for as a team, and to test people's passion, to test people's fears, to test people's motivators. And that's the leader's responsibility, to understand all that and to coach people into a space where they're connecting into those goals in a way that is high energy.
Fantastic. Okay, I've got some questions to run through. We've got 10 minutes before we close. So a great one here. What recommendations do you have to help the naturally glass half empty pessimists in a team, to move them towards optimism? And how do you know when they have the right balance between optimism and pessimism right?
Okay. There's a couple of questions in that. So firstly, how do you move the glass half empty people? That's, what I will say off the bat is that people have to want to shift. As a leader or as a coach, you can do everything you can, but people have to want to shift. So there's a pretty key component to all of that. But if they're willing to be challenged and to shift, there's a couple of things that I would suggest. So firstly, practicing gratitude. So we often forget about the things that we can be thankful for. So that can be a really powerful exercise, just to remind ourselves, it's not all doom and gloom. There are things that we can acknowledge, we can feel good about, and we can feel proud of. So gratitude's a good one. I think the other one is, again, it just keeps coming back to being intentional. So raising people's awareness. Often this is default and it's subconscious. So people often, in my experience, do it in a way they're not even realizing. So we're having this idea session. I had this last week. We're having this idea session, brainstorming session, and there was a guy that just kept sort of, bringing everything down with it. He saw the problem in every solution, but he wasn't doing it on purpose. He wasn't doing it intentionally. I just sort of pulled him aside during one of the coffee breaks, and he was just so surprised, but he was very thankful that I'd raised it with him. So just raising people's awareness that actually, there might be an opportunity here to shift the dial, and I don't have to be on the negative side all the time. So they're my two sort of tips: encouraging people to practice gratitude, and just raising awareness. In terms of the balance question, how do you know the balance is right? This is the point I made earlier about the star being on the right-hand side of the middle, but not all the way over. I've had experiences with clients and just people in my life where I felt it has been overly optimistic. And I think there is a very fine line. In fact, I don't think there is a line. I think being overly optimistic and being in denial in some ways are one and the same thing. So being overly optimistic really does run the risk of being ignorant to risk. And only focusing on the upside. So a good balance in my mind is looking for positive things more often in a way that's not being ignorant to the risk.
Fantastic, thank you. This is a great question, and I'd like to have a go at answering it myself, and then Ivan, throw to you as well. So we have a question: in the current labour market, recruitment is the most common problem for business owners. How do the matters that we have described in this morning's presentation relate to staff recruitment and retention when people are throwing money to recruit? I mean, I would say to that, you know, the most important thing is retaining the staff that you have, retaining the team. And of course, then there are going to be people you have to replace. And ideally, that businesses are doing so well that you're going to have to recruit to enable your business to grow. But unless you have all the things that have been discussed this morning, there's no point continuing to recruit, because you are throwing money away, because you're not hiring people who are passionate. People aren't being hired understanding what the goals and vision are. They're coming into a culture that is reactive and not creative. They're coming into a culture where their leader has no energy, no balance of optimism and realism, correct? So in fact, the work that Ivan and I do together, whenever I'm retained on a search or the team are engaged in recruitment, is actually around diagnosing the culture of an organization at a moment in time, to understand whether the culture of a business is reactive or it is actually creative, and then looping the right fit of new hires into that culture. But you're right, unless it's very aware what the culture of an organization is, and actually what the dynamics of the personality traits of the people you're hiring, then the whole thing can be unraveled. Would you say, Ivan?
Yeah, absolutely. I agree with all of that. The other thing that I would add, I think the question was, part of the question, what components of today's presentation relate to that problem? And the thing that I went to straight away is the zone of influence. This is a tough moment, and businesses are going to lose people because businesses are throwing money hand over fist. So we can sort of worry about that, or we can focus on the zone of influence and the zone of control. I think there needs to be an acceptance and an acknowledgement that this is just a tough moment, and no matter what you do, there's going to be leakage, there's going to be attrition, and there's going to be difficulty in recruitment. But what you can do, just to sort of build on Emily's point, to minimize the damage, not solve. I don't think it's possible. I'm happy to be proven wrong, but more to minimize the damage through this period, is doing everything that you can to keep strengthening the culture. We just know strong cultures have a higher retention rate. That's just been proven time and time again. And the other point I would say is be really clear on your employee value proposition. And I know FutureYou works really closely with their clients on making sure that that's really clear. And if you need some help with that, please give Emily and FutureYou a call. So being really clear, it's one thing to have your, have a clear point of difference to your customers in terms of your brand, but it's also really important to have a clear point of difference to the pipeline of talent, because that's another branding dimension. How do you position yourself to the pipeline of talent in a way that stands you apart? So anyway, that's my addition.
Fantastic, thank you. Time for another question. We've got them coming through, thinking fast now. Okay, so love the session, especially about the factors we can control. One of my most useful mindsets. Would you recommend any tools for senior managers to work with middle managers to benefit their teams to enhance this? So to enhance the fact of how to control what you can control.
The very simple tool is the one that we showed today, and it could just be as simple as printing it off or drawing it up on a whiteboard and just point to it every time the conversation dives into a Vladimir Putin or a supply chain disruption problem or a labor shortage problem. Just point to it and just make sure that there is an awareness in the moment of where the conversation's at. And I just find, whether it be to do with zone of influence or any other thing, when I'm working with the team, just that awareness in the key moment just brings them back on track immediately. So I think that the tool that we showed today is a simple one, but an effective one. But it's just making sure people are aware in the moment.
Fantastic. All right, one more, Ivan. This is a great one. How do we encourage our employees to be responsible themselves for self-growth and self-development?
how to encourage employees to be responsible for their own growth and development.
Because I suppose there would be some employees who just want to do the task at hand, just want to do the job, just want to turn up and get paid for it. But how is there any way to encourage them?
Yeah, the creative model, going back to that creative model, it starts with a goal that they're passionate about. So the opportunity might be to unpack that with the person and get clear on their purpose, their why, their goal. What are they really striving for personally and professionally? And not just a tick the box goal, but one, again, that they're very passionate about, that they care about, that is something that's worth enough to them to keep fighting for and to grow themselves. Because to grow yourself is uncomfortable. It's taking yourself out of your comfort zone, learning new skills, being more assertive, public present, whatever it is. It can be scary stuff. So it's got to be a goal that they care enough about to put themselves in the danger zone. So that'll be the first step for me. I just get clear. I help the person get clear on what it is that they're aiming for.
On their why. Amazing. Thank you so much, Ivan. Really, really great. So a couple of points from me, just to confirm. We'll send a follow-up email to everyone who registered for the event, because we've had brilliant attendance, but there were some people who couldn't attend in real time. So we'll send the recording of this. And are you happy to share the slides, or would you rather people reach out to me and I connect them to you? What's your preference, please?
No, I'm happy for the slides to be shared.
Fantastic, if you can send those through. And then anyone requesting any more information, please don't hesitate to reach out, and I can connect you with Ivan. But in that, if there's anything that you would like to discuss more of or find out more in another session, then I know that Ivan very generously has said that he will do a part 2 of this, because it's a huge topic. So feel free to send me an email or a note with a suggestion of what you'd like to dive into next time. But thank you for everyone for making the time this morning. Thank you so much, Ivan. It's always an absolute pleasure. I get so much out of it myself. It's amazing. So really appreciate it.
Fantastic. No problem, Emily. It was a pleasure to be here with you and your community. So thank you for having me.
Thank you. Take care. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.